Former special counsel Robert Mueller said President Trump could be indicted after he leaves office. In his testimony yesterday, Mueller reiterated his report does not exonerate the president, though he made no decision as to whether Mr. Trump obstructed justice. However, here's an exchange between Mueller and Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley regarding the statute of limitations for any potential charges.
What if a president serves beyond the statute of limitations?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Would it not indicate that if the statute of limitations on federal crimes such as this are 5 years, that a president who serves a second term is therefore under the policy above the law?
I'm not certain I would agree with the conclusion. I'm not certain that I can see
but the
possibility that you suggest.
Kim Wehle is a CBS News legal analyst. She's also a professor at the University of Baltimore School of Law and a former federal prosecutor and associate independent counsel in the Whitewater investigation of President Clinton. So, Kim, when we talk about the statute of limitations, does this mean that the chances of President Trump being charged goes down potentially if he is reelected?
Absolutely. So there's a general 5-year statute of limitations for federal crimes, which means that the government has 5 years from the time of the crime, the alleged crime, to prosecute someone. And if they miss that time frame, that person is immune from any further criminal liability for that particular crime. So if we're talking about obstruction of justice that took place in his first term in office, we'd add another 4 years to that. By the time 8 years are over, he would have escaped the statute of limitations. There's nothing in the OLC memorandum that indicates there'd be what we call a tolling of it, that is, a freezing of the statute of limitations for a president of the United States.
So just to be clear, you're saying that even though the understanding is you can indict a sitting president, the clock still keeps running, even during his 4 years?
There's nothing in the memorandum that precludes that. Now, remember, the memorandum is not a law. It's not an act of Congress. It's not a Supreme Court decision. It's a policy. It's like an employee manual that the Department of Justice has decided we are just sitting back on this one. We are basically telling our employees to stand down. It has no force of law. The statute of limitations does have a force of law. That's ticking away. That's a law passed by Congress. The Justice Department has no power to change that law. The president, as a private citizen, like you or me or anyone else, if he was charged as a private citizen, would be able to point to that statute. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the memorandum, that is, again, an internal policy standard, it is not a law, would necessarily save him. Save the Justice Department.
Understood. So let's say that the president does not get reelected and he leaves office next year. How would bringing charges against him work?
He could be basically charged with an indictment by a grand jury, like many of the other people that were charged, including his former campaign manager, for example, Paul Manafort, in that particular probe, in the Mueller probe. It would be done by a line prosecutor within the Justice Department because that probe itself has finished. Of course, a subsequent president could decide as a matter of policy not to charge Mr. Trump, just like the Justice Department decides every day whether to bring certain cases against certain people and not against other people. We just heard about the death penalty. The Justice Department picking and choosing which of those defendants are going to face the death penalty at the end of this year and early January. Same thing with decisions with respect to whom to prosecute. A president could also, in theory, say, I'm going to pardon Mr. Trump for all crimes. We saw this, of course, with Gerald Ford and President Nixon. That's a political determination, but there's nothing in the law as it stands today that would necessarily make a president, whether it's Mr. Trump or someone else, liable beyond the statute of limitations for crimes that occur in office. Mm-hmm. 2020, as a result, is a critical election, not just to determine who the next president is, but to determine, as a matter of our Constitution structure, and I have a book out on this, the Constitution structure, as to whether we will have an accountable presidency, or whether, as we've heard a lot the last few days, the president is above the law. As was indicated in your clip, if the president cannot be charged while in office, if the president, as a private person, cannot be charged once he's out of office, and if the Congress but for political polarization reasons, simply refuses to exercise its constitutional prerogative to begin impeachment, which seems to be what's happening today, then we have a presidency that has no checks and balances. And of course, that undermines the core structure of the Constitution. But the way that's enforced is, again, through the courts or through the Congress. And right now, neither of those are functioning to hold the office of the presidency accountable.
There were some questions yesterday about why Mueller didn't seek subpoena